She gets so excited because she was so excited when she was turning 16. She was just, I'm going to be 16. And I can imagine what she was going to be like when she was turning 18. I was going to take her to the Mandarin for her birthday. And she said, no, we'll just come home and have pizza. And she was going to have her best friend Jordy here with us to celebrate. But it never come to that because she got hit.
Hit by a car while walking down this road in Moraviantown, the Delaware Nation. Just stepped away from where Bailey Jacobs lived with her grandmother, Alma Jacobs.
Right at that stop sign.
Bailey died 2 days shy of her 17th birthday. Her half-brother Tanner White-Eye and best friend Jordy White-Eye were with her. They were also hit. Was the driver not paying attention? Did he stop at the four-way? Where was he coming from and going to at 1:40 in the morning? Was alcohol a factor? How was it ruled out? Who took custody of the driver? We talked to 3 witnesses who said he wasn't detained for nearly an hour. How did they determine speed wasn't a factor when they didn't even do a speed analysis? And if you're going slowly with your high beams on, how do you not see 3 people in front of you? How is a 350-pound girl thrown to her death and a young man paralyzed? Why weren't people on the scene interviewed until weeks after they called police who hadn't bothered to reach out to them? These are some of the questions people in Moraviantown still have. When we sat down with Alma to discuss the crash, it would have been Bailey's 18th birthday.
Like she was here and then she's gone. That's how quick. But it changed our lives completely.
A year after the crash, 3 families have not come to grips with that. And still have questions about the police investigation. Here's what we know for sure. On November 19th, 2016, a Chrysler 300 comes through this intersection, makes a turn to go south down this road, and quickly hits a group of 3 pedestrians just before that hydro pole there. 1 died, 2 others were injured. The driver of the car sustained no injuries, and after a lengthy investigation, faced no charges. All 4 are members of this small community. 550 people call it home. The Lenape people of the Delaware Nation of Moraviantown live here, on the shore of the Thames River, 3 hours west of Toronto near the Michigan border. They played an integral role in the War of 1812, fighting with Tecumseh and the British to ward off American invaders. More recent in the history around these parts, the Ipperwash crisis. Land defender Dudley George was killed in the clash in 1995, and the OPP and Ontario government, it was later revealed, tried to cover up the reasons the unarmed man was shot by an OPP officer. An inherent distrust of the police still flows through here, surely as the Thames. What questions still linger a year after for you?
There's just a lot that I don't understand, that we weren't given any information. I continually, throughout this entire thing, as my kid was, you know, in a coma, like asking what happened, like what's going on, like how does somebody plow through 3 kids? I don't understand that. Like I don't.
Hi, Constable Dennery. It's Melissa Ridgen from APTN calling. APTN went looking for answers. We requested a copy of the police investigation in its entirety through access to information. We were told a portion, the collision reconstruction report, wasn't covered through access to information, but they'd sell it to us for $1,100. So we paid. While months ticked by waiting for the rest of the paperwork, we went to Moraviantown and started asking questions from the beginning. Jordy White-Eye explained she and Tanner were walking Bailey home, then going to stop for cigarettes. It was around 1:30 in the morning.
We were about like right here. when we seen him coming, we like seen he had his brights on too, like, and we could just see like the light illuminating around us, and he was coming pretty fast. Like you could hear the gravel under his tires. So he was like, we were right over on the side of the road too. I was on the gravel, Tan was a little bit on the road, and Bailey was right behind us.
So you're hit before the first hydro pole. It was where you're.
Yeah, before the first hydro pole.
Where do you end up? You get hit, and you end up where?
I must have just gotten, like, right where we got hit. I must have just got knocked over to the side.
So Bailey would have been hit first because she was behind you guys, but yet she was in front of you.
Like, I remember waking up, and the car was still going, and I could see Tanner like sliding around on it, and he like ends up like vertical on top of the hood, and then the car stops. And then he just like rolls off.
When the driver gets out and runs to see what he hit, they all recognized each other. The man who hit them was 21-year-old Braden Hopkins. A local hockey star who was featured on APTN's hockey reality show Hit the Ice. And he was a police hopeful who worked with the Delaware Nation Police as a summer cadet.
He seen Bailey laying in front of me, and he went up to her, and by that time, like after I got done screaming, all I heard was Tan say, "George," and then I just ran over to him and I sat with him.
The driver used his cell phone to call 911. With a sprained ankle and concussion, she looked for help. Rhonda White-Eye used to live near the crash site. Thanks for meeting me. We caught up with her where she now lives and works in Chatham, half hour's drive away.
Well, I got up in the middle of the night, and when I come back to the room, I noticed that there was car lights on the road. And then I saw a girl running up the house across the road. Got my coat on, I got my sister's truck, I pulled out, and I got to the corner, and the girl came up to me, and it was Jordy. And I rolled my window down, and she said, he hit my friends, help us.
She gets out where she sees two people amid the chaos strewn about.
I said, who is that? And he turned around and he said, Braden. I said, who's that? He said, Bailey. And he was giving her CPR. But I did notice his eyes were red. He was crying. He was quite upset. And I walked up to there and I looked at Bailey, and my instincts at that time told me she wasn't there.
Hers was the second call to 911, and she could hear police sirens on the way. Tracy White-Eye was next on scene. She too lives near the crash, and with her counseling background went to offer help. Her attention was drawn to an obviously distraught Braden.
I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. And he was on the ground crying. And of course, that's when I stepped into wanting to help.
Several OPP officers were at the crash site by this time, and she said they led her onto the scene.
I went up to him and I talked to him, and I'm trying to calm him down and rest and assuring everything's going to be okay, and even did some automatically just energy work. So he I just hugged me, and I kept saying, hug me as tight as you can. And so because I'm grounded to the mother, I was helping him to kind of release some of the, the anxiety and everything that was carrying. And so we were pretty close.
Ambulances took the injured to a nearby hospital in Newbury. Braden remained at the scene. No witnesses recall any OPP officers talking to him. And according to the OPP, Delaware Nation Police Constable Lance Stonefish arrived. He knew all of the people involved and had mentored Braden as a summer cadet. They say it was Constable Stonefish who took Braden into custody. Again, no witnesses recall seeing any of that. At a community meeting later on,
why was not there a breathalyzer? Why was no put into a cruiser? No, he wasn't. There was no breathalyzer. There was no grounds to get
reasonable grounds. He ran somebody over.
5 separate police officers dealt with Braden that night. Not one of them, even after being in the car all the way from bring it down with the heat on to chat attachment, observe any alcohol odor.
And there's many more questions.
If this was still under investigation, why did you allow him to leave the country?
And much more anger.
That's bullshit. My daughter's in the grave and there's no charges. He's got his fucking career and my daughter is laying in the fucking grave.
And after the break.
I would be somewhat incredulous that they believed that that was a proper and thorough investigation.
Months after the crash, the OPP called the family here to a community center in a nearby town. They informed the families that there would be no charges laid and that the case was closed. One of the family members recorded that meeting and shared it with APTN. That's what you were listening to just before the break. A handful of police trying to explain their investigation to survivors and their families. To this day, Bailey's grandma, Alma Jacobs, struggles with what she heard and what she didn't. What were you expecting at the meeting?
I was expecting to hear he was going to get charged. Then I couldn't handle it because I walked out a few times because I was too upset.
I just want the truth. I just want the truth. That's all. That's it. Our lives have been changed forever. The truth, that's it.
Greg Holden owns CK News Review, an online news service in the Chatham-Kent area.
I had heard about the story. We'd run from the police reports. The OPP police had given us the story before, and we'd taken their end of it. And then I started to talk to the families, and I noticed they were writing a lot about it on social media.
He didn't like the lack of answers to justify why charges weren't laid.
Reasons given by the OPP weren't sufficient to the families. They weren't sufficient to the lawyer of the families. I heard the recording of it. It was just insufficient.
According to police, it was just an unfortunate collision late at night on an unlit road. Can I tell you that when I talked to the OPP, they said you guys were walking in the middle of the road?
We were not walking. When we were taught, when a car comes, especially at night, you get over onto the side of the road. It's just common sense.
Yeah.
We were on the side of the road. I remember being on the gravel. I remember hearing the gravel underneath his tires.
Yeah. We'll hear from someone later who can speak to the contradiction of accounts. That's in a bit.
I don't believe that anybody could know for sure. I believe that I would believe Jordy before I would believe anybody else because she was there.
The police investigation wasn't the only thing that bothered him. Local media didn't push for answers. They published these news releases, one saying a collision occurred, and months later, one saying no charges would be laid. End of story.
I believe it was two white families, and it was outside the Chatham-Kent courthouse, and they were all crying like that, sobbing like that it would have been a big news story locally.
APTN started working with the OPP months before this show went to air, looking to get answers to the many outstanding questions and access to their investigation. We were initially told they'd be happy to help, but that changed. After getting a runaround for the traffic reconstruction report we paid for, we were told they wouldn't be interviewed about the case. So we went to the Delaware Nation Police, who were also camera shy. Everything that family says, we're worried about this. Any Canada watching goes, well, they're probably, why would no police talk? The officer we ran into that day said he wasn't involved in the crash investigation.
For a civilian to talk about would be probably no problem. For police to talk about, then we foot and mouth and career.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not that we're hiding anything.
We left our business card to schedule an interview with Constable Lance Stonefish, who the OPP says is the lead investigator. So, but he can give me a shout on myself.
Sure. But somebody
yeah. He never called, but we found Constable Stonefish 2 days later in his office.
Since the OPP administrates us and due to circumstances, that I'm not allowed to comment on any of the investigation or anything that's
So we can't interview you about this?
No.
How are our youth and families supposed to trust the justice system when you're not being fair in everything that you've done here? And I'm supposed to tell our youth and families to go to you to protect them, to be safe. And this is what you're showing me, you know.
It's that the truth is not known. It hasn't come out through this story. Mm-hmm. It's been covered up by either bungling or deliberateness, and it's hard to know for sure. Mm-hmm. But I believe it's bungling. I believe it's the police didn't do their jobs very well.
We asked for the police investigation in its entirety through Freedom of Information. That was back on October 13th, 2017. The Ontario government has 30 days to process such requests, but 3 months later, we've still received nothing. We took our issues with the OPP right to the top, headquarters in Orillia. They convinced the Chatham-Kent detachment to sit down for an interview. A week in advance, we gave them specific questions that we have about the investigation, but on the day we were to interview them from a CTV studio in London, they were a no-show, not so much as a phone call to cancel. We retained this retired Winnipeg police traffic investigator, hoping he could make sense of what happened.
I have experience with crash reconstruction going back to 1996. I was a supervisor of the collision investigation unit for approximately the last 10 years.
He reviewed the OPP's collision report.
It was very weak on information, was the first thing, just skimming through it. Very, very basic investigative techniques weren't included in the report. Well, there's very little correlative information. There are photographs in the report indicating debris on the roadway, pieces of plastic or shoes or a cell phone. But nowhere in the report did it correlate that information to the owner, say, who was wearing that shoe.
So it's impossible to determine who was hit where or how it happened or why.
It's just wholly lacking in any kind of detail.
So if somebody handed you a report like this as a supervisor, what would your response be?
I would be shocked. I would probably send them straight back to the scene to continue with the investigation. But I would be somewhat incredulous that they believed that was a proper and thorough investigation.
He was surprised the report didn't contain an autopsy. What injuries did Bailey die from?
Those details are very important. The mechanism of injury or the mechanism of death, location of injuries on the body, photographs of bruising on the body can give a lot of detail with respect to which part of the car collided with that person. So it's easier to work back to see where the car may have been in relation to that pedestrian at the time of impact.
That's hugely important. Don't forget, the OPP say the pedestrians were in the middle of the road and got hit. Jordy insists they were on the edge of the road and she was partially in the ditch when they were hit. The OPP report doesn't bother to make either determination, just notes where debris was scattered. And APTN spoke to several people who were at the scene that night. Over the span of at least 40 minutes, none reported seeing officers questioning the driver, and no one saw him detained. This veteran investigator explains the problem with that.
The person who was driving the car and the condition that they are in at that time, if they have been drinking or if they do have drugs in their body, their behavior, their smells, the way they look, that all forms evidence, and that needs to be preserved. So the only way to do that is to detain that person while you conduct your investigation.
You'll recall an officer at the meeting with the families had said 5 officers had contact with Braden that night and none detected alcohol. So they didn't breath test him. Where was he coming from and going to at 1:40 in the morning?
Based on the lack of information in the report, we'll never know. To an ordinary person traveling down a dark road with your high beams on at a relatively low speed, you shouldn't miss 3 people walking in the roadway ahead of you. You shouldn't.
APTN has asked for comment from the Office of the Independent Police Review Director, who deals with complaints about police in Ontario. We asked the Crown Attorney why they recommended no charges in this case, whether it was a lack of evidence that a crime had been committed, or was the police investigation insufficient to proceed. They said they have their reasons and they're privileged and confidential and they wouldn't answer. So APTN asked the Office of the Independent Police Review Director, who deals with complaints about police in Ontario. They said unless someone files a formal complaint, they won't launch an investigation into this police investigation. In the meantime, the families pick up the pieces.
And this was a 2-bedroom, but the bedrooms had to be converted into 1 bedroom to be able to accommodate Tanner and the things that he needs. He has endured intensive therapy since he's, since the beginning of the year. Has fairly good use of his hands and his arms, getting better. Is able to feed himself now, which is good. Can do a bit of his own personal care. He can brush his teeth.
Should I have dressed up?
I think you're good to get here.
I thought you were already dressed up.
This makes it a smooth transition to come right into a roll-in shower.
How is he doing mentally and emotionally?
He's at a psychiatrist appointment right now.
Braden Hopkins is now 23 and playing pro hockey in Sweden.
No apologies from him. It's like where the kids were the victim. I mean, the kids wasn't the victim. It's like he was, not our children.
We reached out to him through his hockey team and his personal account on social media, asking if there's anything he'd like to say about the crash or to the families. You can see he read our message, but didn't reply. Meanwhile, Alma had to make the best of another Christmas without her eldest granddaughter.
This is the angel for her Christmas tree, in memory for her, which I'm going to do every year for her. These pink lights I bought for her, which I'm going to use every year for her, because pink resembles my baby girl.
We went back to see it lit up for Bailey.
She'd be so happy for having her own tree. Hey.
And there's another bright light.
This is Muskinus-Walken. We call him Walken. It means strength. And he's like the reason that I'm okay now.
His middle names? Tanner and Bailey.
Children were apprehended by social workers, right? And then the AIM program was really just to find homes for the kids.
Not part of, never enough. That's always been the theme of my life. And here's just another example.
It was a shock to me how they could do that.